Hello and welcome to this next lecture video. In this video we're going to be covering some cost allocation example problems, okay? So if you're following along with your course pack, I'm on page 250, and so this is the Albright Company. So if we look at this problem, it says the Albright Company allocates the estimated $270,000 of its accounting department cost to production and sales, since the accounting department supports the other two departments with regard to payroll and accounts payable, okay? The costs will be allocated based upon the number of employees in production and sales departments. Now that's really important to keep that in mind, because this is the allocation base. Okay. Information regarding costs and employees as follows. So we have a little formatting here. Accounting has 4 employees. Now this $270,000 right up here, this is for those 4 employees, okay? And so what we're trying to do, if we take a step back and we think about what we're trying to do here, what we're trying to do is to allocate this $270,000 of accounting department costs, which represents the cost for these employees and probably some other costs, maybe supplies or something like that. And we're trying to allocate that $270,000 to production and sales. And why are we doing that? Because accounting is a shared function between production and sales. Okay, it's a shared function. And so what we need to do is we want to allocate these costs to these 2 production departments. So if we think back to what we did in some earlier chapters where we're calculating manufacturing overhead, and then what we did is we applied manufacturing overhead, and remember manufacturing overhead is an indirect cost. And what we did is we applied manufacturing overhead to the units that we made. And how did we do that? The first thing that we did is we calculated an overhead rate. And then we took that overhead rate and we multiplied it times the amount of allocation base used by that job. Okay, I'm thinking about job order costing right now. Now, the way that we're going to do this in terms of allocating this $270,000 to production and sales, it's a very similar process. The mechanics are pretty much the same as what we did with job order costing in terms of applying overhead. We calculate a rate, and then we multiply that rate times the amount of allocation base used. So if we think about that, what we do, the way we calculated the rate, if we think back to what we did, is we take estimated overhead, okay, divided by the estimated allocation base. In this case, we're talking about this $270,000. This is the cost that we want to allocate. So we're going to put that in our numerator. We're going to say we're going to allocate this $270,000 worth of cost. Right? And then we're going to, if we think back to what we did with job order costing, we took our estimated overhead divided by our estimated allocation base. In the case of this problem, this represents our estimated overhead. Now then we need to think about what's our estimated allocation base. It says the number of employees in the production and sales departments. These. So if we add these 2 together, we get 60. Okay? So what we can do is divide by 60. And so what this gives us is a rate, $4,500. Now what does that $4,500 represent? That's one thing to really think carefully about. This $4,500 is the amount it's the rate, it's $4,500 per employee in production and sales. Okay? $4,500 per employee that will be allocated. So that's the first step, is we calculate that rate. It's $4,500 per employee. And then what we do is we multiply that rate times the amount of allocation base used, right? So what's our rate? 4,500. We calculated that. Let me move this up. $4,500 right over there. And then what we do is we look and we say, okay, production has 48 employees. Sales has 12 employees. So when we think about production, we're going to take our rate, Say production, we charge accounting allocates $4,500 of its cost per employee in production and sales. That's what this is telling us. So that if we think about it that way, if we were to write it out like that, it makes the second part, which is to figure out how much of that $270,000 goes to production, how much goes to sales, makes it a lot easier when we think about it that way. So we say we have $4,500 per employee, and production has 48 employees. So we just come over here, 4,500 times 48, okay? And that's how much goes to production. And then if we look at sales, we say it's our $4,500 per employee times the 12 employees in sales. And then that's how much goes to our sales right over here, okay? So if we recap what we're doing over here, the first thing that we need to do, and we have a cost allocation problem like this, calculate the rate, cost to be allocated divided by allocation base gives us the rate. The rate times the amount of allocation base used is then how much is allocated to each department. So in this case, production had 48 employees, 4,500 times 48. Sales has 12 employees, 4,500 times the 12, okay? So I'm going to go on to the next page, and then we have another problem right over here, okay? Let me move it up some, make sure everything's on the screen, okay? So our lighters, cheaters, and fools, attorneys at law, specialize in 3 areas: criminal, civil, and family law. When specifications for a new computer system were established, the criminal law needed 60% of the capacity, okay, for the new computer system. That's what that's telling you. Civil law needed 25% of the capacity of the new computer system. Family law needed 15% capacity of the new computer system. The partners agreed that the fixed costs of the computer department would be allocated based upon these percentages. That's important to recognize that, okay? Variable costs, though, for the computer department would be allocated based upon the number of computer minutes each division used. Okay? The computer department's budgeted fixed costs are $700,000. Budgeted variable costs are $150,000. The firm estimates that 400,000 minutes of computer time will be used, and we don't need to worry about this right now. Okay? So, the question says, if criminal law actually uses 190,000 minutes of computer time, what's the total amount of computer department cost that will be allocated to the criminal law division? Now this problem is a little bit different than the other problem that we did, because in the other problem that we did, that $270,000 was lumped together. There was no attempt to split out that $270,000 between how much of that $270,000 of the accounting department was fixed and how much of it was variable. In this problem, what we're doing is we have the computer system, and with regard to the computer system, we have split out the costs for the computer system between those that are variable and those that are fixed. So what that means is we have a dual rate allocation scheme. I'm going to say that again, a dual rate allocation scheme, okay? So in that case, what we have to do is we have to allocate out the variable costs separately from the fixed costs. Now, if we think about the fixed costs are a little bit easier because it says that the criminal law needed 60% of the capacity. And so basically what they get is 60% of the $700,000 fixed costs, okay? So I'm going to come down here. The first step that I'm going to do is I'm going to say my fixed costs. And in that case, I'm just going to say the percentage, 60%, times the estimated fixed cost. Remember, these are budgeted situations. Okay? Again, why do we use budgeted situations rather than actual? We use the budget for pricing purposes and makes it easier for the divisions, in this case criminal law, who receives the cost to do their budgeting, because then they know they get 60% of the $700,000. Okay? And that makes it easier for them to budget. If it's actuals, it could be all over the place every month, okay, or every year. So it's easier to do this based upon budgets. It makes it easier for the division manager of criminal law to do his or her own budgeting. So back to the problem, we look at our fixed cost allocation. So what we have to do, we take our 700,000 of fixed cost times our 60%, which is the capacity that they agreed upon. Okay, gives us our $420,000. Okay, and then the second thing that we do is we come down here, then we do our variable costs. Now with our variable costs, we have to first do our rate. So first step, just like we did in that other problem, we calculate the rate. Now how do we calculate the rate? Estimated costs divided by our estimated allocation base. So what are our estimated costs? $150,000. Because again, we're only talking about variable costs now. So I can only put the $150,000 in the numerator here. The firm estimates that 400,000 minutes of computer time will be used. So I can divide that by my estimated total allocation base. And what that gives me is 0.375. What is the interpretation of this? That the manager of the computer system charges 37.5 cents for every minute of computer time used. They charge 37.5 cents for every computer minute used. So if we think about it that way, it becomes easy to solve the next problem, because it says right over here, criminal law uses 190,000 minutes. Well, if they're charged 37.5 cents for every minute of computer time, we can just come over here and go 0.375 times my 190,000. That's going to give me the variable cost of the computer system that will be allocated to criminal law. And when we do the math, it's $71,250. So now what we can do is we can add the two together. Step 3, add variable and fixed. So now what I can do is I can go my 420 plus my 71, and this gives me my 491,250, which is the total amount of cost that will be allocated to criminal law. Okay? So if we look at the next problem over here, it says if family law uses 57,000 minutes of computer time, how much are they going to be allocated? Well, in this case, if you look back on that other page, you would see that they get 15% of the capacity. $105,000 is the allocated fixed cost from the computer system that family law receives. The other thing is we already calculated our rate, 0.375 or 37.5 cents per minute of computer time. Family law uses 57,000 minutes. This represents the allocation of the fixed cost of the computer system to family law. This represents family law's share of the variable costs, which are based upon how many computer minutes they use. So now what we can do is add the two together, 126,375. Then we can look at the last one. It says, what amount of the computer department's fixed costs will be allocated to civil and family law respectively? Well, if you just look back at the percentages, it's this 25% times the 700,000 gives us our 175, which is to civil, okay, civil law. Then if you were to look up here, you can see that family law had 15% times the 700,000 gives us our 105 to family. Okay, I'm going to end this lecture video now, and the next one will be doing some more cost allocation problems. Thank you.